The PM promises an independent inquiry into his government's handling of COVID, what he calls the gravest pandemic for a century. He pledged to place the state's actions under the microscope from early next year. But some who lost loved ones say it should start sooner.
Why can't it start tomorrow? It's almost like we are dying inside because we're longing for answers and now we've got to wait till spring.
Also tonight, fears of a full-scale war with the escalating conflict between Palestinian militants and Israel. Mourning their brightest star, the tragic death of 9-year-old Jordan Banks struck by lightning in Blackpool. And honouring our healthcare heroes, the service of thanks to the men and women who nursed us through the nightmare of COVID.
This is the ITV Evening News with Mary Nightingale.
Good evening. Long-awaited plans for a public inquiry into the government handling of COVID crisis have finally been revealed. The full independent inquiry will begin in the spring of next year and will take spoken evidence under oath. The Prime Minister said it will put the state's actions under the microscope after nearly 4.5 million cases. And some bereaved families welcomed the news but called for it to go ahead sooner. Our political correspondent Romilly Weeks reports.
There are no shortage of questions for the COVID inquiry. Did we lock down too late? Why was PPE in short supply early on? Did test and trace work effectively enough? For bereaved families like Courtney Rumble, who lost her beloved grandmother Violet to COVID, the Prime Minister's announcement of a full public inquiry is welcome.
The right moment for the inquiry to begin is at the end of this period in the spring of next year, spring 2022.
Delaying the start to spring is not.
Why can't it start tomorrow? When someone dies of COVID, yeah, one person dies. That's not the only affected person or impacted person. You then have families behind that who almost like it's almost like we are dying inside because we're longing for answers and now we've got to wait till spring.
In the Commons, the Prime Minister promised the inquiry would be able to compel witnesses to give evidence and would put the government's actions under the microscope.
Amid such tragedy, the state has an obligation to examine its actions as rigorously and as candidly as possible and to learn every lesson for the future, which is why I have always said that when the time is right, there should be a full and independent inquiry. This inquiry must be able to look at the events of the last year in the cold light of day and identify the key issues that will make a difference for the future.
The Labour leader too questioned why it couldn't start sooner.
The principle is that the inquiry should be as soon as possible. As soon as possible. Now, I understand a statutory inquiry will take time to set up. Of course it will. But why can it not be later this year? Why can it not start earlier?
Those who worked in care homes during the pandemic have their own pressing questions. At Wren Hall, they lost 15 residents and felt totally unsupported.
We were floundering. We didn't know what we should have known, and we didn't have the equipment that we should have had. So those two things, knowledge and equipment, has to be there should this happen again in the future.
The inquiry will examine all aspects of the UK's response to COVID. It will be thorough, but it might take years.
There's so many people that are so desperate for answers. It keeps me and my mum awake at night.
Hard for those like Courtney who feel they can't grieve until they understand what happened.
So, Romilly, an inquiry, but not until next year. What do you make of the timing then surrounding this?
Well, Mary, the Prime Minister set out his argument on the timing today, saying that it can't be sooner because it will take months of preparation, not just for those in government, but for those in the NHS. He raised the prospect of there being a surge in infections potentially this winter and said we can't weigh down the efforts of those engaged in trying to protect us. But because of the nature of this inquiry, which will be like the inquiry into the Iraq war, it will take years. So it could be until 2024 or 2025 before it concludes. So it could even be after the next general election, which might suit the Prime Minister just fine. The other aspect of the timing, which might be in the back of Boris Johnson's mind, is that his former aide turned chief critic, Dominic Cummings, is due to give further evidence before MPs later this month. He has made it clear that he believes that there should be a public inquiry. By announcing one now, the Prime Minister might be hoping to take some of the wind out of his sails. But it is disappointing to the families, as you heard in my report there, who've been pushing for this for over a year.
Romilly Weeks in Westminster, thank you. Moving on now, and in the Middle East, fighting has escalated and the United Nations is warning it could lead to a full-scale war. Since Monday, Palestinian militants have fired more than 1,000 rockets towards Jerusalem and other Israeli cities, including Tel Aviv. At least 7 people are dead. Israel has retaliated with hundreds of airstrikes over Gaza, killing at least 43 people, including 14 children. The violence was sparked by the potential eviction of some Palestinians from their homes in East Jerusalem and by a raid by Israel on the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is one of the holiest sites in Islam. Clashes between Israeli Jews and Arabs are escalating. Our international correspondent John Irvine's report from Israel begins with the Hamas onslaught from Gaza.
It's the intensity of these salvos fired from Gaza that has shocked Israel. The sheer volume of rockets that Hamas has been able to unleash simultaneously. It's safe to say that never before has Tel Aviv faced such a heavy bombardment as it did in the early hours of this morning and last night. As we found out in southern Israel today, the volleys there are incessant. With at least 7 Israeli citizens dead and dozens more injured, everyone knows the Iron Dome defensive shield is being pierced quite regularly. The Israelis believe that Hamas have used Iranian technology to give at least some of their rockets a lower flying trajectory to make them harder to intercept. They're still unguided and indiscriminate, and one has struck this oil storage tank beside a power station. An Israeli soldier was killed when an anti-tank missile fired from Gaza struck his jeep. Inevitably, Israel's retaliatory airstrikes on the enclave have been forceful and sustained. The Israelis have been targeting top Hamas commanders, men who have decided to attack Israel in an attempt to take over the leadership of the Palestinian people. The head of Hamas and de facto ruler of Gaza has already declared victory in what he called the Battle for Jerusalem. What's different about this latest spasm of the conflict with the Palestinians is that it has multiple fronts. The arrest of Hamas members on the West Bank has led to clashes in several cities there. But what is really concerning Israel's leaders is the trouble that has erupted in mixed communities inside the country itself. Jews and Arabs have been attacking each other, synagogues vandalized, a Muslim cemetery set on fire. In places where both sides have enjoyed relatively good relations for years, the violence has come as a shock.
My neighbors became terrorists. My own neighbor.
Benjamin Netanyahu knows the drill when it comes to fighting Hamas, but quelling intercommunal strife inside Israel is something else entirely. Today he pledged to stop the anarchy with an iron fist if needed. No one is backing down here as Israel finds itself faced with adversaries both without and within. John Irvine, ITV News, Tel Aviv.
Here, the family of a boy who died after being struck by lightning have paid tribute to him tonight. 9-year-old Jordan Banks was hit yesterday evening while out playing football. His family said he was their brightest star and our everything. Garrett Vincent is in Blackpool this evening. Garrett, this is just tragic, isn't it? Terrible case.
Awful set of circumstances here, Mary. Jordan Banks was a 9-year-old boy who loved playing football. He was practicing here at around 4 o'clock yesterday afternoon when a violent thunderstorm came in and police believe he was struck by lightning. He was very badly hurt and taken to hospital but died shortly afterwards. This evening, as you say, his family have released a statement. They describe Jordan as their brightest star. His laugh, that infectious smile, golden curls, he was our everything, they say. Our love is endless. Good night, beautiful boy. And we've been learning today that Jordan really did pack a lot into his too short life. He recently ran 30 miles in a series of runs to raise money for a mental health charity. And we spoke to the chairman of the football club that he played for today, and this is what he had to say about Jordan.
Jordan was the life and soul of the party, a very fun, loving young lad, loved life, raised money for charity himself, enjoyed his football, enjoyed running, enjoyed all different aspects of life.
Huge number of tributes here left by the edge of the playing field in Jordan's memory, among them flowers and football shirts from the teams that Jordan played against in the local league. And on one of them, a message is written. It reads simply, "Score goals in heaven, little man." Mary.
Garrett Vincent in Blackpool, remembering Jordan Banks there. Now, a court order has been registered in the Prime Minister's name over an unpaid debt. The county court judgment made in October last year relates to a sum of £535. And our political correspondent Libby Vina is in Downing Street this evening. So Libby, explain, what's Number 10 saying about all this?
Well, essentially, they're saying that the Prime Minister doesn't think that he owes this money. A spokeswoman saying earlier this afternoon that an application has now been made to strike out the claim on the basis that it is without merit. Now, earlier, Downing Street wouldn't say very much about what the dispute involved and who was demanding the £535 from the Prime Minister. Of course, unresolved is the issue of who initially paid for the Prime Minister's rather lavish refurbishment of his accommodation in Downing Street. We're told it was nothing to do with that, but whatever the reason he is being pursued in the courts for this money, it is embarrassing for a serving Prime Minister.
It certainly is. Libby Vina in Downing Street, thank you. Still to come, the ITV Evening News, the housing hotspots where prices are surging and...
We pretend to be heroes, and these people are genuine heroes and heroines.
The actress Helena Bonham Carter speaks at a service of thanks for nurses. Those stories and more after the break. Join me then. Hello and welcome back. Now, there are tentative signs that the economy is bouncing back as we gradually unlock. But one area in particular is booming. House prices are going through the roof. Although not everywhere is seeing a surge, but figures given to ITV News show that prices in Cardiff city centre saw an annual drop of 7%. The average price for a house there is a fraction over £209,000. In the centre of Nottingham, meanwhile, prices are down by 5%. But Lee, in Greater Manchester, saw the second highest growth, and that's up there by nearly 13%. And right at the top of the table is Wallasey on Merseyside, where prices are up by nearly 16%. The average property there now costs more than £176,000. From there, Richard Pallow reports.
Here, they just keep on rising. House price increases on the Wirral Peninsula that overshadow Liverpool itself and indeed everywhere else.
How much going through the lounge on your left?
Lockdown for the year, many have saved up for a move.
Have you seen many in this price range at all? About?
Not yet.
No, there's not much out there.
only to find others have had the same dream. 5 Burns Avenue had an open house today, a property in need of renovation and a very quick decision.
It's absolutely bonkers at the moment. People are buying sort of from video.
Every time I see a house and a phone up, it's already been sold by the time I don't even get to view it.
Oh, it's either you buy it or you don't. You've got to get in there quickly.
Or you lose it.
Yeah, exactly.
A neighbourhood that few leave and that now compete with the exodus from the city centre.
We've got a lot of open space and that's causing a bit of a frenzy at the moment. We've got close access to the beaches. So when we're putting a property on the market, people are fighting for it. We're getting more viewings than we've ever had before and prices are often going over the asking price 10-20% easily.
The viewings have been pretty relentless despite it being Wednesday lunchtime. These are the 5th in the first hour that anyone's been able to see inside. In all, 23 are scheduled in just the first 24 hours.
It's not good, not for people who want to buy. No, not good.
Down the road, Pam is trying to help her mum Cynthia find a bungalow. The pair, though, are being priced out also.
At the moment, I just think I can't make out what's going on. It's not the norm of how you go and buy a property or view a property. I've got to the point now, I think, do I need to bother looking at that? Because I know the answer already. Yeah. It's either gone or you can't view it.
And that makes you feel?
Helpless.
Ironically, the stamp duty holiday means new buyers pay more in higher prices than they generally save from the Chancellor's handout. But low interest rates and a lack of housing stock may well prevent a severe market crash, given demand shows no sign of letting up. Richard Pallow, ITV News, Wallasey.
And we found out today the economic recovery gathered pace in March, despite most lockdown restrictions still being in place. Overall, the economy is almost 9% smaller than when the pandemic began. And our economics editor Joel Hills is in Margate in Kent, where the resort is preparing, isn't it, to open up further on Monday. Joel, presumably the recovery is going to continue as restrictions are eased then?
Mary, I was last in Margate almost precisely a year ago, and the outlook is immeasurably brighter. It is not business as usual yet. The Dreamland amusement park is keeping the rides closed until social distancing is lifted entirely. But along the seafront, the cafes are starting to return to life. The Turner Gallery reopens on Tuesday, although the beach behind me has been largely quiet all day. Now, if the government is able to stick to its roadmap out of lockdown, there's every reason to expect that the recovery will continue apace. Here in Margate, around 1 in every 6 employees is still furloughed. Unemployment has risen, but on nothing like the scale that was feared. Government support has been incredibly successful at keeping people in jobs. It's also been incredibly expensive, of course. National debt has risen to levels that we haven't seen since the early 1960s, and the Chancellor may at some stage decide that money needs to be repaid. Now, this recession has hit the youngest and those on the lowest incomes the hardest. And earlier, when I spoke to the Chancellor, I asked him if he would pledge to ensure that older generations and those on higher incomes bear the brunt of any future tax rises he deems necessary. He wouldn't, but he did say this.
Well, if you look at the figures, those on the lowest incomes have seen their incomes protected the most by the government through this crisis. We're also raising the national living wage this year above inflation to help those on the lowest earnings. And on young people, and you're right to raise this, they have been impacted, and that's why schemes like Kickstart are so important.
Margate is a tourist resort that's endured a terrible winter but is banking on a very busy summer. What happens next, of course, depends on the path of the virus, how quickly restrictions lift and how business and households behave when they do.
OK, Joel, in Margate, thank you. Bit of other news now. People in England aged 38 and 39 will be able to book a COVID jab from tomorrow morning. This age group will be invited to book from 7 a.m, with around 1 million people due to receive a text from the National Booking Service. And finally, this evening, we began tonight's programme with the COVID public inquiry starting next spring. And we end with a special service held today in honour of the nurses here and around the world who've given so much over the last challenging and, in many cases, heartbreaking year. Rebecca Barry reports.
This is an annual event.
But there's never been a year like this for the UK's nurses and midwives. At Westminster Abbey, the Prime Minister, among those here to thank the carers who've looked after so many throughout the pandemic.
For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was sick, and you took care of me.
The service commemorates the Lady with the Lamp, Florence Nightingale, who was born 201 years ago today, still inspiring those who follow in her footsteps.
They looked after us, we must look after them.
The actress, Helena Bonham Carter, is her descendant.
I mean, the irony is that us actors, we get awards all the time. I mean, and sometimes I think it's disproportionate to what we actually do. We pretend to be heroes, and these people are genuine heroes and heroines.
While this socially distanced service celebrates the dedication of frontline workers, soon a public inquiry will scrutinise was enough done to protect and support them through the toughest of times.
I spent many a night worrying, would we have enough PPE to keep them safe?
Kaitcha Gull is a palliative care nurse. She says the last year has shown nurses deserve more.
After this year, I mean, what better year to show that impact of the thousands of lives that were saved, and those that weren't, who were stood beside the bed of those that were dying. It was the nurses.
While a spectacular service can't repay their sacrifice, it is, at least, a gesture of people's gratitude. Rebecca Barry, ITV News.
Oh, we can never thank them enough, can we? And that is all we have time for tonight. Julie's here later with news at 10, but from me and all the team on the Evening News, bye-bye.